This is the part of the training where we kind of segue into getting ready for public engagement. We're going to talk a little bit about media engagement specifically in just a moment. But public engagement is any kind of, obviously public meeting, any presentation that you might be giving, any board of trustees meeting where it's, it's open to the public. And you need spokespeople in these situations. And a spokesperson is a loose term because it's not necessarily just somebody who stands up in front of a camera. It's somebody who represents the library officially, basically, okay? And when you pick spokespeople, you need more than one. You should have sort of what I call a cadre of spokespeople representing the organization. And they might not all work for the library. They might be folks who are, as we had talked about before, like third-party supporters. It could be members of organizations, library organizations nationally, could look like a lot of different things. But there are qualities in spokespeople that you want to try to find. It's not necessarily people in positions of power, presidents, directors, executive directors, because it really comes down to how are these folks in terms of their relatability, can they stay on message, do they exude sort of calm and competency, especially in a crisis. If they're getting peppered with questions, either in a meeting or, in any kind of capacity, can they handle it? Can they sort of pause and be clear about, okay, this is what I want to say? And they also understand that, timing is really important. So that if they, let's say, for example, it's somebody who, is going to represent the library in a public forum or in a media interview, do they understand that they have to quickly prepare? And can they quickly prepare? Can they be ready on short notice? So those are kind of the qualities that you want in a spokesperson. Oops, hold on, let me see if I can get this to work. Okay. So what makes a good spokesperson? The first thing is that they understand that the community is their audience. And if I haven't said this already, I'll probably say it again at the media section. But, the media is a pipeline, right? They're writing multiple stories any given day, and they're very transactional because they have to be. So once they're done with you, they're on to the next thing. So they're really the conduit for how you're going to reach your people, the folks who you care about, who come into the library, or stakeholders. Good spokespeople humanize every issue. They make it relevant. They make it, sort of like, why should I care about this issue? They communicate that to the community, okay? They don't give personal opinions. So, somebody might say to you, okay, well, I know as the library director, you have to uphold, these things. But personally, how do you feel about this book? Would you want your child reading it? You're absolutely not reading. You're not answering that question, right? Your response in that situation is, and I'm here in my capacity as a library director, and we feel very strongly, blah, 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 okay? No comparisons. Well, what about, the XYZ library? They don't have that book on their shelves, type of thing. You know what? You're just focusing on framing the issues the way you feel they need to be framed and relying on your core messages, okay? And that's what good spokespeople do. They stay super disciplined. They use sound bites that they have already got sort of worked out before they engage in a public discussion. And they don't waste quotes like those sound bites, those what I call the money quotes, communicating details that they can get on a fact sheet, right? So it's all this sort of visceral stuff. It's, this is why, it is our, core belief that we need to provide this information to the community, or this is, these programs, illuminate issues and lifestyles, and we want folks to understand what they are, like whatever that sort of, visceral, from the heart kind of information that you want to give to people, that's a good quote. Okay. And we're going to give you some examples in a moment. What you don't want to use a quote on is something like, something that's like their reporter or somebody is asking a money question, or they're asking about, well, how many employees do you have? Or, how many libraries are in your system, to the extent that you can, that information's on our fact sheet, which I'm happy to share with you. But, my role as a library director is to ensure unfettered access to information for people in our community, or something, I'm sort of making that up. But, you get the point, I think. And they use statements whenever possible, because statements equal consistency, equal framing, equal discipline. You don't have to, statements cannot be messed with once you send them out. And if they do need to be edited because they're long by an outlet, you guys will negotiate that before they, before they publish. So those are some of the tools that a good spokesperson uses. What they do avoid, though, is they avoid repeating a negative. No, we're not promoting pornography. They're not defensive. A good spokesperson knows that they need to stay on message. Otherwise, they risk opening up a whole other line of questioning that could take you down a path. I like the visual for me is, you have a path you want to walk down, right? As the library spokesperson, and that path is paved with your core messaging. But the public or a reporter tries to veer you into a different direction by asking you questions that, may not be relevant, or you don't want to answer, they're negative. The minute you start to follow that other path, now you've lost sight of where you need to go, and that's when you can get into trouble. So think of it that way if you can. The other thing good spokespeople do, they don't educate a reporter in a live interview. And the reason that is because the time for education happens when someone like Celeste, who's, I'll use her as an example, if that's okay, Celeste, Celeste is creating messaging. She's sharing messages with reporters, or whomever. And basically that's the time for education. When an interview, or you're in a public forum and you're being asked a question, so it's, live, that is not the time to start downloading a lot of information about the issue. It's time to stay on message, because you don't have the time or the luxury to bring everyone up to speed, if that makes sense. So it's like you're basically forcing people to listen to what you have to say or write what you have to say, because that's the best way to inform the public, right? You're not in any kind of an environment. You're there to promote the issues the way you see fit, because you're the expert, not to start, educating folks from scratch, right? And they use background briefings. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with background briefings, but they are a beautiful tool. And what they look like are, let's say right now you have things percolating in your community, although it sounds like many of you are like sort of in it right now in terms of different crises. But as they're percolating, you might say to yourself, you know what? I feel like we're going to get media coverage around this, or I feel like the mayor is going to ask me to present at, a meeting publicly. I want to make sure that everyone involved, whether it's a media outlet or your stakeholders, completely understand the issue the way we see it and how it affects us. But I don't want to do it on the record type of thing. And that's when you can do what we call background briefings. Specifically, I'll talk about this just for a moment from a media perspective, because I think that's what you guys are faced with right now. Educating reporters who you're dealing with now to inform future coverage, so that when they do write about this, when you do have something hit the fan and they're forced to report on it, that you've given them the information on background that they need to write a good story. And so that might look like, hey, Joe, this is John from the library, and we've got some things percolating. We're wondering if you'd like to come in or have a phone conversation about it off the record. And that's critical. If they say, we won't speak to you off the record, then all bets are off, right? Then you really have to stay on message when you do engage with them. But most of the time they will. They want to hear what you have to say. Off the record has to be agreed upon, okay? You have to know what kind of negotiation you're involved with. So off the record means you don't want to have them, quote you or write anything about what you're about to share with them. These meetings usually take only about a half an hour to an hour, but being off the record means you have the freedom to share. Look, this is what's happening, right? These are outside groups. They're the number of book challenges that they have, initiated has skyrocketed. They're focused on LGBTQ plus and Black people and blah, 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 blah. Okay. So that kind of information, even though they're not writing a story in the moment, will help when they do write a story. And so background briefings are a tremendous tool. So one of the things that, you probably have heard us talk a little bit about today already, and you've heard the term before, is something called bridging language. And we're going to do an exercise in just a moment, but I think bridging language is useful in so many different ways. Bridging language essentially can look like a lot of different things, but it's the bridge from a question, even if it's not a bad question, if it's just an inane or misinformed question, to a core message. That language that gets you there this is your safety place, right? Your core message. So it can look like something like, you get this question from somebody, and the answer, before you get to your core message, is one of your answers. You're going to say, well, let me start by saying, or, we can get you that information, as I mentioned earlier, like we can get you that information, and we're going to send you the fact sheet that covers that. But here's what we're focusing on. Or you hear a question, and, first the question is this. So you're not agreeing with them. And I think Kate mentioned this a little bit earlier, like you're not agreeing. You're not saying, oh, yes, okay, well, I hear your question, or, yeah, that's a good question. You're not saying any of that. It's very neutral. Well, let me start by saying, X, Y, Z. And it's the best way to control an engagement. So whether it's a public question and Q&A at a community meeting, or if it's a media interview, bridging language is what gets you from a question to a safe place, which is your core message, okay? I'm going to give you an example. So this came up at the last training. Somebody had said, yeah, this is exactly what I've been asked, which is, why would the library oppose removing sexually explicit books from its shelves to protect young readers? And there's a lot of ways you're going to respond to that, but here's a suggestion. So you get that question, let me start by saying that our library believes in intellectual freedom, and that it's the right of every individual to access information from all viewpoints without restriction. Then from there, you can go into a message maybe about caregivers, like, caregivers really should determine what is most appropriate for their child. And then maybe a little bit more, right? These challenges are from well-organized, nationally, politically motivated groups pushing bans on books and programs targeting LGBTQ plus and Black material. So you kind of see how that works. So basically, you get to decide how you are going to answer every question. But the key is that you're answering it the way you want to, because you're the expert, and the way you want to answer it is based on core messaging, because you've already worked that out. So there's no guesswork when you're in the middle of a crisis. You know what you have to say, and this bridging allows you to get there, okay? So what I'd like to do now is have just a few minutes, not 3 or 4 minutes, 5 maybe, and you can put these in the chat or not. It's up to you. You can write them down and just hold on to them. But anytime I'm prepping for a crisis, a media engagement, a community meeting, anything that looks like I have to prepare somebody to manage the dialogue, I like to list with them the questions. What are the worst questions you could be asked, or questions that you get asked a lot and that you need to be thinking about how you're going to answer? So maybe we can just take a few minutes now and you can list a few questions that you personally are worried about having to answer in any capacity. But I'd give it obviously I would make them the ones that you're either most afraid of or the ones that you get asked the most, so that you can prepare for answering them. Okay, so we'll just take a couple of minutes. Okay, does everyone feel like they've had enough time to think about a few questions? We got some good ones in the chat. Things around like, why should my tax dollars go to pay for books like this? Or, not so much a question, but, you know, I'm going to run for a board seat so I can change the policy, that kind of thing. What's really important to know, and we're going to get into it now because we're getting into the managing media interviews, is that it almost doesn't matter what the question is. And I say that, it's funny, I've done trainings before where people have been like, I'm in the helping people business, which I know you guys are, you know, I'm in the sharing information business. I don't want to limit, you know, the information that I give to people, right? That's not my thing. Well, what's interesting about your role now in dealing in a crisis and dealing and serving either as a spokesperson or creating messaging that spokespeople will communicate is that you're switching roles now. Now you are taking off your librarian hat and you're putting on your communications hat. And they're two very different functions. So let's, we're going to get into that. But let me just say this, that the exercise that you did of just literally just jotting down some questions, when you're back in your office, one of the things that you might do is, you know, look at your core messaging and look at some of the bridging language and say, okay, how can I bridge? How can I get to this place from a question? And it's not that you're not going to answer the question, right? At some point, some of this stuff is required, right? It's a foiable thing. You've got to, you know, you're going to answer it. You have to answer it. But when you're in a live engagement, your job is to just keep bringing people back to your core messages as a way to inform the public about the issue. It's as simple as that. So even though you're feeling the pressure to answer questions, the truth is that is not your job in this role, okay? So let's talk about this. Excuse me, I'm getting my... Okay, so managing media interviews is a really, it's a very important skill to have. And even though, you know, we're talking about media interviews, the foundation is the same. Like, you know, this is exactly how you would manage any engagement, okay? So it's not, if you say to yourself, well, gee, I'm never going to be interviewed. You know what? This has application for any kind of public discussion, all right? So the first thing is, I alluded to this earlier, you have to know that, especially as a public, in any kind of public-facing discussion, you know, that you're going to be at odds sometimes, and specifically in media interviews. The reporter has a job, right? And that job is to ask questions and to get to the story, get to the crux of what they want to write about, okay? And they can do that through questions. Your job, on the other hand, is not so much to answer every question. Your job is to inform the public. And the way you inform the public is you repeat and you repeat and you repeat the library's core messages around that particular issue. And I don't know if it was Tony Blair or Bill Clinton, but one of them said, like, you know, you get to the point where you've said something so many times that you just can't bear to keep saying the same thing. That's when the public starts to wake up and go, oh, that's what they mean. That's the issue. And the reason that is because people are busy. You're competing with a lot of information that folks are dealing with constantly. And certainly, you know, unless something is relevant to someone's life, they don't necessarily always pay attention to it. So that's why the repetition, that's why the focused messaging. It's not that you're not trying to be helpful, because, you know, the media outlets are your partners in many ways. It's just that, you know, the more, we'll talk about this in a second, the more you put out into the universe, the more, you know, people have to sift through to get to what you really mean, okay? And the way I like to look at it is, you know, 20 questions, 20 answers, or 20 questions, 5 answers. And the reason, you know, I like that visual is that, you know, it's like, you know, I love this example. If you throw spaghetti against the wall, right, some of it's going to stick, but what sticks is really up for grabs. If you're throwing 5 pieces of spaghetti against the wall, you know it's going to land. So that's the premise, okay? So the way you control the outcome of an interview, and I've had plenty of clients say to me, oh, Maria, you wouldn't believe it. I did this great interview and nothing of what I said made its way into the story. And I immediately know why. It's because they answered every question. They didn't hone in on the one thing they needed to communicate. So the way you control the outcome, being so that it's something that you're happy with and that it reflects well on the library, is that you begin with core messages, right? So, hey, thanks so much for talking with me today. I'm so glad to talk to you about blah, 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 right? You're sort of like putting a stake in the ground. Here are the issues as we see them. Okay. You anticipate the questions. We've already done that, right? Like, what could they ask me? So that you're not like, ooh, deer in the headlights, which is a lousy feeling. And you basically, you use bridging language to get to a safe place with your core messages. You use your sound bites and you stop talking when you're done, right? A reporter asks a question, you answer it and you're good, right? They can go on to the next question. That's fine. The key is to avoid being led down that path that you don't want to go on. So you just keep redirecting. Here's where we're going. Here's where we're going. Here's what the public needs to know about this information. Okay. Now, we talked a little bit about sound bites earlier, and they are really important. And what the thing to take away on the sound bite, the thing to remember most, is that you need to figure out what they are in advance. Okay. If you were a politician, and we all know how great they are at coming up with a good sound bite. If you were a politician, you've seen them do it, right? They distill everything. It's like, lower taxes, access to healthcare, better education. Each of those topics are complicated, but they know that they cannot start educating the public or reporters in the moment. It's just too much to wade through. So it's like boom, boom, boom. And so that's how you want to think about them. Basically, reporters are looking for sound bites. If you don't give them one, they will assign you one, and they will pick it from the, bunch of language that you used in the interview. It may not be what you want. So you pause, you give your sound bite, and there it is. It's really great for presentations as well, especially if it's a long presentation. It just punctuates dense text, and it can't be understated, how valuable they are, especially if you're talking about something that's, heavy on the data. It's like you're basically picking out the most salient points, making it relevant to people, and it looks like, something that people want to sit up and listen to in a soundbite. We'll give you some examples. So I was looking at different, and in the past I've used different soundbite examples, but I actually found two that were related to the libraries, and I thought they were great. The first one is the library should be a place of free thought and free-flowing ideas. Doesn't that just beautifully capture what the library's value is in the community, right? Almost like it's a sanctuary type of thing. And that it's a place where you have unfiltered access to all types of information. Like, what a gift. Okay. I liked this one a lot happened during COVID. Open to all was not good enough. Ultimately, we want to share the message that you belong here. I just love that. So they don't have to be, super complicated, or actually we don't want them complicated. They don't have to be super funny or, interesting. Just need to get the job done, right? Just capture the essence of what you want to say. So I encourage you to think about what those might be before your next presentation, or if you're going to do a media interview. So how do reporters get you to, open up? They create an environment where it's super friendly and casual and all of that. You need to know that from the moment you talk, the reporter walks into your office or you're on the phone with them, to the moment they leave, and I mean leave, you know, or you hang up the phone, you're on the record, completely on the record, all right? Unless you feel like comfortable enough to say, I'd like to give you some information off the record, and they agree. Every reporter's idea of off the record is different, so you want to know what that is. Like, I can't be quoted in this article, but I want you to have information about this stuff. Or you can't quote me personally, but you can say a library source. Like, that gets very nuanced. So unless you're 100% comfortable with that, you need to just assume that anything you say is up for grabs, okay? They wait until the end to ask a difficult question, right? So it's all good, and then boom, here comes the question that makes you a little bit nervous. Silence after response, or they ask you to respond to a claim by an anonymous source, which you're absolutely not doing. You know, we don't respond to claims by anonymous sources. And the bottom line is you're staying on message anyway, so it almost doesn't matter what's being asked. You're redirecting, or you're telling them you'll get them the information because it's public information, but you're not going to burn a quote on it, okay? I actually have... there's a couple of good videos that Erin is going to throw into the chat. And when at your leisure, take a look at them. What I like about them is they lead with spokespeople who like own the interview, right? They have determined what the agenda is, and they're answering the questions based on what they want as core messaging. So take a look at those when you can.